content. Just needed one dropped from the Mythic rankings. Kind of just needed to reset, regain perspective, kind of refocus. Grinding can be a lot on this game, so now I'm really excited. Just spent a lot of the day kind of reviewing um, the new cards that are coming out literally tomorrow. So really excited to share this with you guys and kind of see everyone's opinion and feedback on what my thoughts are for the cards. So here's our Zendikar Rising pre-launch review. I'm only going to be covering red cards, so I'm pretty excited about this. All right, so quick overview. Going through all the cards, commons, uncommons, mythics, and rares, and I'm reviewing them on a 1 to 5 scale for both standard and historic, and I'll give my reasoning for both. So my scale is simple. A 1 is this card will not see play. 2 is it's an okay card. So it kind of leans towards between it may see play and won't see play. If it does, it's just an okay, decent card. 3 is a card I think that may see play, whether it be his sideboard, main deck. There's possibilities with it. 4 is a card that I think will see play, whether that be in the sideboard or in the main deck. I think it is a card that probably has potential. And 5 is probably going to be really dominant in a card that I think will 100% see play and probably be in a good amount of lists. So yeah, let's get into it. All right, first batch of commons. Synchronized Spellcraft here. Um, I gave it a 2 for standard and a 1 for historic. So Synchronized Spellcraft deals 4 damage to target creature and X damage to that creature's controller, where X is the number of creatures in your party. So for a 5 drop, this is a lot, and the most it can deal is 4. So I don't think it's that great. In historic, there's just a lot better kind of burn spells out there than this. So I really don't see this getting too much play in historic. In standard, I could see it being comboed off with a party deck of some sort. Kind of unlikely, but who knows? I think it's an okay card. Next is one a lot of people are excited about. Me personally, I can't say I'm too thrilled about it, but we'll see. Alcuum Hellhound. So this is basically a red step links. The way it works is whenever a land enters the battlefield, it gets +2/+2 until end of turn. The problem here in Wizards, I think forgot about this, is we don't have fetch lands. Fabled Passage is it. So when we have a land enter the battlefield for us, the best this can be really is a 2/2, and with Fabled Passage, sure, it can be a 4/5, but the odds of that happening are very slim. Red decks don't really play Fabled Passage. So I'm not completely sold on this card yet. I gave it a 3 for standard and historic. I think it's an okay 1-drop. We don't have the greatest of 1-drops right now in standard or historic. So I think it's probably on a decent playing field. I think it may see play, it may not. We'll see. But it's got potential. Next is Grotog, Bug Catcher. I think this card's okay. Whenever it attacks, it gets +1/+0 for each creature in your party. So the best this can be is a 5/2 with trample, which is not bad. And of course, it counts towards itself being a warrior. I don't think it's going to see a lot of play though. I gave it a 2. I think there's a lot better 2-drops right now in at least historic than this card. In standard, I still think there's some better 2-drop slots. I'd rather be playing some burn spells than this creature. So yeah. And then next is Spitfire Lagic. So as landfall, whenever a land enters the battlefield, does 1 damage to each opponent. I gave this a 3 for standard because I think there's probably going to be some landfall combo deck that this could fit in if it does exist. So that's why it's a maybe see play, or just it might not. So I'm kind of torn on it. Historic, I gave it a 2. It's an okay card. You can probably make some beginner mono red list that will combo off with it, but it's being a 4-drop. It's just pretty difficult. If this was a 2-drop, I think this card would see a ton of play. But as a 4-drop, I'm just not completely sold. I think this card If it was the same cost as a Mana Cobra, Lotus Cobra, and let's say it was a 0-2 or a 0-3, I think this card would be awesome, but it's not. So next set of comments, we got Tormenting Voice. I'm going to give it a 1 for standard and 1 for historic. It's already in historic and it doesn't see play. So I don't think it's going to see play even right now in standard, since it was recently in standard and saw very little play. Next card is Teeter Peak Ambusher. I didn't give this a rating. It's supposed to be a 1 in 1. I just don't see it seeing play in standard or historic. It seems like a really good draft or limited card, just not really for these two formats. The next one's interesting. Tuk Tuk Rubble Fort. Defender and Reach, 3-drop, creatures you control have haste. I was a little bit torn on this, but when I thought about it more, it didn't make sense. There's other ones out there, walls like this, that say whenever a creature attacks, it gets +1 up +0 and stuff like that. So I consider this just a 1 for both. It won't see play in historic for sure. I know that it's too slow. Standard, it's also just too slow unless you're going for big red. I think there's a lot better 3-drops out there that standard would rather be playing right now. Next card is Scorch Rider. Scorch Rider is a bit interesting. 4/3 for 4, pretty good. Kicker's only 2, and when it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, it gains haste. So the best you get is a 4/3 creature with haste. I'd rather just be playing Torbrand over this in the 4-drop slot. In historic red, we're not even playing 4-drop cards right now, because right now in red, 4-drop is kind of slow. So I gave it a 1. I don't think it will see play in either format. So this next one I'm a little bit torn on here. Sneaking Guide. It's a 1/1 1-drop red creature. Tap 2, target creature with power 2 or less can't be blocked this turn. I think this card's. I gave it a 3 in standard because it can combo off with some of the other smaller red creatures we have. So I think that's incredibly important. And it has the rogue creature type, which means it works with the party. So I think it's a 3. I think it will probably see play in some party decks and allows you to just kind of get through some creatures, which is really cool. For historic, I gave it a 2. I think it's an okay card, but like I said, I think we just have a lot better 1-drops right now in historic to play. Um, Next is Expedition Champion. I gave this card a 2 in standard and a 1 in historic. So in standard, getting +2/+0 as long as you control another warrior. I think it's okay, but the best it can be is a 4/3, and that's on turn 4 when you decide to attack with it at the best. I think there's a lot of better 3-drops, like I've said right now, in standard, other than this card. In historic, I gave it a 1. This card just isn't going to see play. This next card I'm actually very pumped up for, Royal Eruption. So this is our basically lightning strike we have right now for the format. It's a 2-drop. The kicker's 5, which is crazy, but sometimes when you're in top deck mode against control, this isn't bad. The way it works is it just deals 3 to any target. If it was kicked, it deals 5. So not bad. Standard, I gave this a 5. We don't have lightning strike anymore, and this just works as a great way as removal for your opponent's creatures, or just going 3 straight to the face. I really like this card in standard a lot. Historic, I gave it a 3 because historic we do have access to a bit better burn spells than this. But maybe we run as a 1 of in a burn list like the Raiden list or something like that, just so you have a kicker for 5, or if you get your opponent down to 2 and you're just in top deck mode and you top deck 1, you can win the game. Type deal. So I think it's a pretty decent card overall. I think it's the best common, one of the best commons we have right now from Zendikar Rising. The next one is Fisher Wizard. When it enters the battlefield, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. I gave it a 2. I just think the looping ability is okay, being a 2/1. I think there's a lot better 2-drops for sure right now for red from this set that will be played over this card. And like I said, we still have Runaway Robber of the Rich. So we're going to be definitely playing that over this card for sure in red. But it's definitely got unique design. Historic, I gave it a 1. The only list I could see this being played in is goblins due to it being a goblin. Um, but even at best, there's Conspicuous Snoop and a couple other 2 drops you'd rather be playing over this card. The next card I have on the list is Ardent Electromancer. So I'm kind of 50-50 on this one still. So whenever it enters the battlefield, you can add 1 red for each creature in your party. So this could enter the battlefield and add 2 mana to your party, 4 mana to your party, and remember, it counts itself because it is a wizard. So my thing is, you could potentially cast Emberclave when you drop this, let's say turn 4. So if you go 1 drop, 2 drop, 3 drop, you play this, and you've tapped out and you got 1 mana open, you can add a decent amount for each creature in your party, um, and cast an Emberclave. So it's okay. Also, you could cast Torbrand off it with the extra mana. I think the extra mana is really, really good. So I'm pretty 50-50 because that extra mana goes for both formats right now. So we'll see. I'm sure someone will be able to find some crazy combo, but until I see it, I'm not completely sold on this card. The next card I absolutely love, Cleansing Wildfire. Destroy target land as controller searches their library for a basic land card, put it on the library, and then shuffle the library, draw a card. So why do I like this card? A lot of people have been sleeping on it. I think this is probably one of the most underrated red cards in the set. So why does this work? Well, the set's mechanics are all around landfall. Like I said before, we have the 1 drop Hound, 1 drop Step Links basically, where turn 2 you could play your land, cleansing fire your own land, get another basic out, and your Hound now is a 4/5 turn 2, swinging for 4 is pretty impressive. Um, Also, in sideboard decks, this for historic shuts off Blast Zone, which is a major killer for our deck, and red right now for our low drop creatures. Um, and also just gets rid of some of the utility lands. Maze's end deck is in historic. Crazy for me to say that, but it is true. Allows you to deal with that. Also, if your opponent's playing dual lands, you can kind of cut them off a little bit with this card. So I think that's pretty important. But in standard with the landfall mechanic, I think this is super, super good. And the one thing no one else really realizes with this is you get to draw a card off it. So if you have a dead land in your hand, you can play that land, play this, and go and get your draw mobility going. I think that's just priceless. So overall, I'm pretty pumped to see how this card's play. I'm really sold on Cleansing Wildfire and Royal Eruption from the commons for sure. Our next batch of commons, we got Pyrolastic Helion. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you may return a land you control to its owner's hand. When you do, it deals 2 damage. So basically, it's a 5-drop to deal 2. In historic, this will not see any play. In standard, it's okay. I could see it being in some crazy landfall deck, but it's nothing out crazy. The next one I've seen a decent amount of people kind of big on. I'm not really a big fan of it. Sizzling Barrage. Uh, it deals 4 damage to a target creature that blocked this turn. So you can do some in combat tricks with it, but I think we have for standard I gave it a 2 because there isn't a lot of ways to deal with in combat kind of trickery. Historic, there's a ton of better just burn spells to be using instead of this. So I gave it a 2. I think it's an okay card. I think there's just better cards we should be playing in the 2-drop slot for sure. Um, Next is Scavenge Blade. I gave this a 2 in standard and a 1 in historic. The reason why is there's a bit of equipment stuff going on right now in historic, and also playing this, let's say, turn 2, you go land and you have a Hound out, you can play this, it automatically equips, and now your Hound is a 4/5, or no, 4/3, and you're able to get him for 4. So I think it can lead to some early early combat tricks for standard. I'm not completely sure, but I think it could. Historic, this is just not going to see play. Next card is Molten Blast. Choose one, deals 2 damage to target creature or planeswalker, and then the other is destroy target artifact for a 3-drop. In historic, there is a card called Abrade that is this but better, so it will not see play in historic. Standard for a 3-drop, this is a bit pricey for a removal. We have better cards for it, so I gave it a 1. Next card on the list, Inordinate Rage. Target creature gets +3/+2 until end of turn. Scry 1. In Historic, I really doubt this will see play unless you're playing in some crazy combo list um, with Kin Fiend, but here I don't think it is. I gave it a 3 for standard. The reason being is I think that extra push for being able to push a creature through a big combat against a big creature is really important. Plus, you get a scry, which allows you to kind of take a look at your top card and just see if you want to keep it or not, which is important when it comes to, like, let's say a mid-rangey type game. So I think it's an okay card. It might see play in some of the more creature based decks for sure. All right, on to the uncommons here. First one, Thundering Spark Mage. When it enters the battlefield, it deals X damage to target creature planeswalker, where X is the number of creatures in your party. The best this can do is it deals 4. Historic, this will not see play. Standard, it could. I'm not completely sold on it because it's dealing it to a creature. It could clear a pathway for a big creature, which is kind of nice. But overall, I don't think this card is well equipped for the standard meta right now, with the direction Red's trying to go at least. Next card is Goma Feta Vanguard. Whenever it attacks, target creature an opponent controls with power less than or equal to the number of warriors you control can't block this turn. I gave it a 3 in both standard and historic. I'm 50-50 on it. The reason being is whenever it attacks, um, because there's going to be a decent amount of warriors we have in the set, and I think in both standard and historic and the creature based decks, if we have it on a more warrior base, um, it's really going to be able to shut off some bigger creatures from blocking. So I think that's kind of cool, and especially for a 2-drop, I find it pretty useful. So we'll see. I think it's a really good 2-drop in the set for sure. But it comes down to see if warrior decks become a thing or not. The next card is Alcuum Warrior. I give it a 1 for both. It's just a 4/5 trampler that can be a land. At best, it's either a land that comes in tapped, which I'm not the biggest fan of as a red player, but it's just a big body. In limited or draft, I think it's a fine card. I think in constructed, it's kind of meh. Next one is Grotog Night Runner. This card's pretty interesting. So when it deals combat damage to a player, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. Historic, I gave it a 1. The only deck that's really going to play it is Goblins, if they would, and they have better cards they can be playing. Whereas also for mono red and red deck wins, we have better 3-drops than this for sure. Standard, I think it is okay. You could play it, let's say, turn 3, and then it deals combat damage the next turn, turn 4, and you just hit a bomb off the top. You could play it, but we'll see. I think, like I said, I still think there's better 3-drops in the format right now than to be playing this. Next card, Spikefield Hazard. In standard, I gave it a 3. It can be a land, a tap land, which is kind of nice. Even though I'm not a fan of the tap lands, but the reason why I think this one's okay is it is removal. It can deal 1 damage to any target, and if it would die, it would be exiled instead this turn. So the reason why is you can use it for some combat tricks. If you attack into an Uro, let's say, and you cast this on the Uro and you kill the Uro, your opponent can't escape the Uro out of the graveyard anymore, which is really huge. In standard, I think that's really important. So overall, I really like it. In historic, unfortunately, we have cards better than this, but who knows it? We could see play because of the land side of it. I highly doubt it, but it's an okay card. So we'll see. I'm kind of 50-50 on it for standard. All right, next batch of uncommons. Kazul's Fury. It's basically a 3-drop fling. You sacrifice a creature and it deals damage equal to the creature's power to any target. I don't think we will play this in historic just due to the fact that we have some really good 3-drops currently. In standard, I think this is kind of cool because we still have Annex. So what this allows is if we play Annex, let's say, on turn 3, Annex is just, we'll say at best, it's like a 5 or a 6-drop. Next turn we attack, Annex gets through, we get our opponent down to 6. We can just sacrifice the Annex and finish our opponent off with this card. I think it maybe is like a 2 of in list. It allows for some pretty interesting post combat tactics for sure. So I think it's a 3. Historic is just it's not going to see play. Next card is Rock Slide Sorcerer. It's a 4-drop. Whenever you cast an instant sorcery or wizard spell, it deals 1 damage to any target. It's a 3/3. So it's okay card for both standard and historic. It's just a 4-drop gutter snipe, but worse in my opinion. I don't think it's really going to see play in historic. It could in some like a Raiden 3 list, where it's just all burn and bolts. Um, but as a 3-drop, it's still pretty expensive, and standard it's the same thing there. So I'm not really sold on this card at all. Next is Shatter Skull Minotaur. It's a 6-drop. However, it costs 1 less to cast for each creature in your party. So the reason I think this card can be played is let's say turn 2 or 3, you get 3 or 4 cards in your party. You could play this pretty quickly and get a 5/4 body out on the battlefield, which is pretty cool on turn 3 or 4 at best. And I think that's incredibly strong. And forces your opponent to focus on that instead of your little creatures or other creatures, which is also a good thing. In standard, I give it a 3. I think this card could be played in other lists, and I think that's kind of important. I think it's a sleeper card for sure, but we'll have to see what type of party decks come out for red at least before this card gets played. Historic, I gave it a 2. Um, it's an okay card. If you're like new to Historic, you could be playing it, but for a competitive mono red list, I don't think this card will see play, but who knows? Maybe I'm wrong. Next card, Skyclave GOP. This is another card that combos off with the 2-drop Destroy Land card. The reason why is this is a 3-drop trampler that says landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield, it gets +2/+2. Sure, it's a 3-drop, and sure, it's a 3/1. However, being able to have 2 land drops hit, this can go up to a 7/5 with some of the methods we stated earlier. And if not, usually off a land drop for a turn. Turn 4, you're swinging in for 5 points of damage with trample. And that's, in my opinion, I think that's insanely strong for standard right now. So I think this card will see some play in standard for sure. Not sure what type of deck, maybe more of a creature deck, but I think this is a really good 3-drop right now in standard. Historic, unfortunately, we have better 3-drops, but this is an okay card. Maybe it makes it to a list or two, but I think we still have better 3-drops in historic right now. Next card, Songmad Treachery. It's a 5-drop. You gain control of target creature, and it gains haste. It's basically a 5-drop act of treason, but you can play it as a land. Standard, I gave it a 2. I'm sure someone might be able to make some jank deck with it, but I think it's just okay. I don't think it's like terrible, but who knows? Maybe it sneaks into some random list. Historic, it's a 1. We have Claim the Firstborn and a bunch of other cards. So I'd rather just be playing those over this for sure. Last batch of uncommons. First off, we got Fireblade Charger. It's a 1-drop. When it's equipped, it gains haste, and when it dies, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. Why is this good? Well, we have a couple equipment cards in the set that we can play. With this card, like I said earlier, for some of the common cards, we had an equipment. You can attach to this turn 2 and let it swing for 3. And also, if it lives and we can get an Emberclave on it, let's say, this card could do some serious damage after it dies. So I think it's just a really good card for a 1-drop. And even if it dies right now as a 1, let's say it dies as a 1-drop, you're able to ping your opponent for 1. So it's a Goblin Arsonist at worst. So overall, I think this card will see play in standard. Plus, it's a warrior, so it counts towards the party total. So overall, I really like it. Historic, I think we still have better 1-drops, but who knows? Maybe this could sneak in later on. And historic can be a really good 1-drop. But yeah, in standard, I think this card is going to be really good in mono red decks. This next one, I am a huge fan of. Thundering Rebuke. It is a 4-drop. Deal 4 damage to target creature or planeswalker. I gave it a 4 and a 5. The reason being is I think this replaces Fry in the sideboards of historic decks. The reason being is it lets you just deal 4 to a planeswalker, and the only planeswalker really this doesn't really get after and kill that I can think of off the top of my head is Nissa. But it deals some big time damage to some other planeswalkers, and also in historic clearing the board, dealing 4 damage for 2 is pretty important. Lava Coil does it too. Um, I think this is probably just as good as a Lava Coil right now in the 2-drop slot, and even maybe we take out one of our Abrades and replace it with this. Who knows? I'm just a really big fan of this card in the sideboard of a lot of historic decks for sure. Standard, I think it's also a really good sideboard card. It deals with a lot of the threats right now out there in the meta. It deals with mono green. It deals with mono white aggro decks, and it's going to continue to do so. So I think it's a great sideboard card for red decks for sure. Definitely a 4, um, because I'm not completely sure what the strategy is going to be for red, but this could easily be a 5 and 5 in my opinion. Next is Cinderclasm. Uh, Cinderclasm is a 2-drop with a kicker of 1, and the way it works is it deals 1 damage to each creature, and then if it was kicked, it deals 2. This is important to note that it deals damage to your own creatures as well. Standard, I gave it a 3, just because it could deal damage to some of our opponent's weaker creatures if they're playing some of the smaller creature decks. And at best, they can do a board wipe. So if you're playing more of a kind of a big red deck, it could really deal with the pesky little creatures your opponent has. So I gave it a 3 in standard. I gave it a 2 in historic. I think we have a lot better 2-drops in this, but who knows? Maybe I'm wrong and this makes it in the sideboard of a deck. I think it's just okay in historic. But yeah, I'm pretty pumped on that card as well. All right, on to the rares. So first we got Wayward Guide Beast. I've seen a lot of mixed reviews. I'm pretty 50-50 on this card as well. It's a 1-drop trample and haste 2/2, really good, except for whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you got to return a land you control to your hand. So not the greatest secondary effect unless you want to try and combo off with some landfall stuff. But I'm not too sold on it yet. I think it could be maybe act as a 2-drop 2/2 blocker, because remember it can kind of block some of your opponent's creatures coming in. It contributes to Annex. I think it will. I think it could see play in some decks, but I'm not sure it's our best 1-drop as we still have Fervent Champion and some other 1-drops out there. So time will tell. Historic, I don't think this is the greatest 1-drop out there. We got a lot better 1-drops right now than this. Um, so it's an okay card, but I don't think it's going to be played in any historic list. The next card I'm really pumped about, Kerrigan Intimidator. So it is a 2-drop 3/1. And it states, cowards can't block warriors. Why is this important? Well, for 1 mana, you can choose one of the abilities on it. It either gets +1/+1 until end of turn, target creature becomes a coward, or target warrior gains trample until end of the turn. Why is this important? Well, if we're in the late game and we want to stop a creature from blocking, we can with his ability. If we want to pump it, we can. If we want to give something trample, we can. And it's a 3/1. It's a big body. I really like this card in standard. For any red creature deck, I think this card is an auto include for sure. I think it's just really dominating as the 3/1. Historic, I gave it a 3. 50-50 on it. I still think we got a lot of good 2-drops in historic. Maybe it slides in to a Embercleave list. Um, Not sure yet, but if it does, the ability to pay 1 and stop a creature from blocking is insanely important too. So we'll see. I definitely think it's a really cool card for sure. One of my favorite cards in this set. The next one I think might be the best card in the set though. Magmatic Chandler, 2-drop, but this time it's a 1/3, and its ability states, as long as there are as long as there are 4 or more instant and sorcery cards in your graveyard, Magmatic Chandler gets 3/1. And it's another ability says tap, discard a card, exile the top 2 cards of your library, and then choose one of them, and you may play that card this turn. So why is that important? Well, let's think about this. From a red burn perspective, you will definitely have probably 4 more instant sorcery cards in your graveyard at any point in the game. So this will probably at most likely be a 4/4 card in the burn list, which is awesome as a 2-drop. Also, let's say you play it early, you can just keep cranking out its ability to get instants off the top of your deck and just play them. It's a free life to stage because you're able to discard a card. You can get rid of a land card you don't need and dig for burn. I think it's awesome. Historic too. Like I said, for the burn list, you will play it. And also, even though it's not red, Rakdos Arcanist list should be playing this card. I think it's bonkers in there. We'll see. And then the other thing to note for standard too is now that we have a lot more instant and sorcery cards that we can play around with for like a more Bernie matchup, I think this could also be a 4/4 there for sure. I think this is probably the best red card in the set, and it definitely shows for sure. Next card, Valakut Exploration. So it's a 3-drop enchantment that states whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, exile the top card of your library. You can play that card this turn. At the beginning of your end step, if there are cards exiled with Valakut Exploration, you can exile. You put them in your graveyard and it deals that much damage to your opponent. So this card actually pairs well with Magmatic Chandler and Standard, in my opinion. I've been kind of thinking of a Chandler exploration list, but we'll see what happens. But it's pretty. I think it's an okay card. We'll see if it goes anywhere. If you're not playing an instant sorcery list, I'm not sure this is the card you want to be playing. But overall, I think it's okay. Historic, I don't see this seeing play. Maybe I'm going to be completely wrong, and it's in every burn deck out there. But as a 3-drop, it feels just a little too slow. The only way I could see this being played in Historic is just an oops, all burn spells list. So who knows? Maybe I'm wrong, but we'll have to wait and find out. The next card, Relic Robber. 3-drop with haste, 2/2. Whenever he deals combat damage to a player, that player creates a 0/1 token that can't block. And at the beginning of your upkeep, it deals 1 damage to you. So why is this good? Well, let's say we're playing Emberclave, right? So I gave it a 3. The only reason why is I only see this card being played in Emberclave lists. The way it will work is you equip your Embercleave to this turn 4. You attack, you get through for trample damage. That's 1 token, and you get through for another. That's 2 tokens. Your opponent now has 2, 0, and 1 tokens out on the battlefield that are pinging them basically for a shock every turn. And overall, after the game goes on, that kind of adds up to a lot of damage. So that's the only place I could really see this card being played right now in Standard. Um, so yeah, unfortunately, Historic, I gave it a 2. We just have better 3-drops to play than this. But in Historic, I think it'll be really cool. Not Historic, in Standard, I think this will be a really cool card to see if it gets played right. Rounding out the rares, we got Rolling Vortex, 2-drop. And it states at the beginning of each player's upkeep, it deals 1 damage to them. That includes yourself. So it's basically just pinging each player for 1 every turn, which over time obviously adds up. And as a burn deck, we have so many frustrating games where we can get an opponent to, let's say, 3 damage, and this can just finish them off. It also states whenever a player casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast a spell, Rolling Vortex deals 5 damage to that player. That's pretty good. And then for 1 mana, your opponents can't gain life. That's also not too bad. So here's my personal opinion on it. Standard, I gave it a 2. And I think I'm going to be proven wrong on this. And I kind of realized it today, too, after talking with some people in the Discord, that this really does well against the Lucky Clover decks. So with the Lucky Clover decks, they're having to pay mana for the first time they cast it, but not the second time the spell's cast. So every time they cast, like, say, a Bone Crush and we have this out, they're actually taking 5 when they have a Lucky Clover out. So I think it could be. I think at best it's. I'll give it a 3 for Standard at best, and it's a sideboard card. I don't see this as a main deck card at all. For Historic though, I see this as a 4. This is really good against Junsack. The reason being is for the cat combo, for it to come out from the graveyard, they got a sack of food. That's no mana. That's 5. That's pretty good to me. And Also, stopping your opponent from gaining life. There's a lot of life gain out there right now in Historic, and just for a simple cost of 1, you can stop that. So not too bad. The next card, Valakut Awakening. It's a double-sided card. It can enter as a land that comes in tapped, but we're kind of more interested in the instant effect of it, which is put any number of cards from your hand on the bottom of your library, then draw that many cards, +1. As a 3-drop, and standard, I think this is important. In burn, we see so many decks and so many times, and even in standard, where our hand just runs out of gas, and we have this. So we can play this, discard a land, draw 2. You kind of got a new fresh burn hand there at that point. In standard, I think this will definitely see play. I'm not sure if it'll be a sideboard or a main deck card, but basically the ability to restock your um, hand is just really, really important for red decks, and I think now we finally got a card other than Light Up the Stage that can kind of do it. Unfortunately, in Historic, like I just said, we do have Light Up the Stage, which is a bit better than this. Um, so I gave it a 1 for Historic, as I don't think this will see play in Historic. The next rare, Shatter Skull Charger. I gave it a 4 for Standard and a 1 for Historic. It's a 3-drop, kicker 2, trample and haste. If it was kicked, it enters with +1/+1 counter on it. If it didn't, you have to return it to your hand. It's a 4/3. This could work well in a counter deck if you can drop it turn 3 and find a way to get a counter on it when it enters the battlefield. Probably a Boros deck is the best way I see this card working. Who knows? Maybe I'm wrong. Um, but yeah, I think it's an okay card. Um, for Historic, it's a 1. We have better 3-drops. But for Standard, I think for the 3-drop slot, this will fit in really nice with, let's say, a Annex or something like that right now. So I like it in the 3-drop slot a lot right now in Standard. The next card we have is Nahiri's Lithoforming. I gave it a 3 in Standard. I'm sure someone's going to be able to break it. It's an X and 2 mana red. Sacrifice X lands for each lands. Sacrifice this way, you can draw a card, and you may play X additional lands this turn. I am sure someone's going to find a way to break this card. I have no idea how. That's why I gave it a 3. Um, Personally, I have no clue, but we'll see. Historic, I gave it a 2. I think it's an okay card. The only way it gets played is if someone figures out some just groundbreaking land sack combo deck, like a Scape Chef type list. So I have no clue, but who knows? We'll see. And then finally, to round it out, we have our 3 Mythic cards. I'm not gonna lie, I was pretty disappointed by these 3, but we'll see. First one, Leyline Tyrant. It's a 4-drop, 4/4 dragon with flying. You don't lose unspent red mana as steps and phases end. That's pretty important, as you can just tap mana that you didn't spend at the end of your turn or at the end of your opponent's turn, and it just stays there forever. And whenever it dies, you can just pay that amount of red, and it deals that much damage to any target. Standard, I gave this a 3. 4-drop doesn't feel too slow. And just the ability to keep having and accumulate all that mana. The way I see this working is, I guess we play this card and just worry about accumulating a ton of mana over a ton of turns. Um, and then just when it dies, utilizing that mana and basically going straight to the face for a crazy amount of damage. That's the only way I really see this card working. 4/4 flyer is kind of nice too. But I'm not really too sold on it. I'm gave it a 3 because I'm sure someone's going to figure out some crazy way that this card can work. But until that happens, I'm not too sold on it. Historic, this is a 2. Being a 4-drop, it's just a little too slow right now for the current Historic meta. Next card, Morag Fury of Akum. Can't pronounce it. It's a 6/6, 6-drop. And it states when each creature you control gets +1/+0 for each time it's attacked this turn. And its landfall ability states whenever you play a land, if it is your main phase, you get an extra combat. So you can do this in your main phase 1 or main phase 2. Preferably, in my opinion, I think it's better in main phase 2 to basically attack twice a turn with some creatures. Unfortunately, you have to do this turn 7. Unless you're playing a ramp deck, I just don't see this card being too crazy. So I gave it a 3 for standard, but I'm sure, like I said with the card before it, someone will figure out a way for it to be good. We'll just have to wait and find out. Historic being a 6 drop, it is just way too slow for mono red, so it's a 2. Unless, again, someone there figures out a way for it to be broken. But I just kind of doubt that. The next and last card is our Mythic Land flip card. It is Shatter Skull Smashing. It is X and 2 red. And the way it works is it deals X damage divided as you choose among up to 2 target creatures and or planeswalkers. If X is 6 or more, it deals twice X as you choose amongst any 2 creatures or planeswalkers. I think I gave it a 4 in standard. The reason being is there's a lot of situations where late game we just want to just really deal a lot of damage to creatures and we don't have burn spells or we want to clear a board to make way for our creatures to get through. This card really just allows for that to happen. And if at best you don't want that and you need a land, you got a land on the back that can come in untapped for 3 damage. And being a red deck, we don't really care about our life too much. So I think you'll see a decent amount of play in standard for sure. Historic, I'm not too sold on. I gave it a 3. Um, I think at best it's a sideboard card right now for a couple lists. For the Ember Cleave list, for when you get basically your one creature out and you have no way of getting through, this kind of allows for that to happen. You're just top decking lands. Other than that, I kind of don't see it seeing play. So yeah, overall, that's my review right now for red. I think there's some cards I'm really looking forward to, and there's some I'm not. I'm I'm a little disappointed, I'll say for sure, in Wizards of the Coast. Um, I think we got some okay cards when you look at the grand scheme of things. Okay cards, but compared to other colors, red's kind of being left in the dust since Throne of Eldraine. So I think it would be really cool. Maybe next set or the set after we get some really nice red spells and red cards to cast. I am excited to start playing some of these cards for sure. I'm not sure what I'm going to be playing, as there's a lot of options to go, and I'm going to kind of wait and see how the meta settles before I really start picking up a standard red list. But I have a couple ideas for decks I want to try out. But yeah, I think it's overall, I'm really looking forward to this set. I think it'll be a lot of fun to play draft, play standard, play historic with some of these new cards. Adds a new fresh take to Magic. But like I said, we'll just have to wait and see what happens. The biggest request I have is kind of give us some better red cards next set. From a standard point of view, I think we definitely need them. Historic, we 100% need them. I could go on a whole rant about why red is really kind of falling off right now in historic and how 3 decks are just dominating. Goblins, Junsack, and Sultai Uro. But who knows? We'll see what happens. Maybe some people figure stuff out. I really enjoy brewing. I'm really excited to start testing with these cards. I'm really looking forward to hearing what everyone else has to say about this. And yeah, um, and that's my review. So feel free in the comments or chat or anything like that to ask any questions you got, for sure. And yeah, any questions?